I'm always humbled when I present on the Civil War. I've loved the Civil War ever since I was a kid. I grew up in Colorado. Zero Civil War activity in Colorado. I don't know where it came from. I think we did an East Coast tour when I was in middle school, and I really just fell in love with it. And my first year was at Penn State, and I joined the Harrisonburg Civil War Roundtable. Harrisburg. I live in Harrisonburg, but Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And I was the youngest member of that club at the time. And to end up writing a book in the Civil War and studying it was just all by accident. And that's kind of like how I like to start my presentation. But before I do, I just want to say thank you to Bill and Bruce for your hospitality. Jack, it's good to see JMU alumni here. And having Chris in the audience is super special. The guy wrote more than a few books about it. So I'm humbled to be here. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to highlight 6 battles where landmines took place in the American Civil War. And I'm going to take one from each year, maybe 2 in 1865, including Fort Fisher, because of the audience. I'm not a Civil War expert. I love the Civil War, like I said. But what I hope to do is show you an introduction to landmines and IEDs, especially for your generation. The #1 cause of our casualties overseas are landmines and improvised explosive devices. I wrote a couple books on landmines about the global crisis, never expecting or realizing that the first war where landmines were used on a widespread basis was the American Civil War. Everybody in the world thought it was World War I when tanks were introduced in 1917, and Germans invented landmines to counter the British tanks. And by happenstance, I ended up in the Shenandoah Valley, Civil War country. I joined the Civil War, the Shenandoah Battlefields Foundation. I'm a trustee of that organization, who's co-sponsoring or sponsoring province conference that Chris is actually going to speak at. So anyway, so that's what I want to do. And so I want to make it exciting for you because I believe in this, obviously. And I just want to share with you some of my research. I actually listened to it on the Audible this morning, driving down. It's the first time I'll share with Chris. I have not opened the book. I have not read anything in the book since it came out because it was so painful. 8 years, blood and guts. Okay, I'm exaggerating about the guts part. No, I'm not. I had to edit out so much, but the footnotes were like 25 pages because I looked at telegrams and this and this. So, okay, I could talk about this forever, and I'm not. So I promise you this. Okay, how does that go forward? Hope. Ed, I forgot to mention you. Maybe that's why it's not moving forward. I thank you, Ed, for setting this up. Now, how do I move it forward? Yeah. Oh, there. Okay, done. Okay, so this is the presentation time. Introduction to the global landmine crisis. Introduction to the Civil War and landmines. Personal introduction to landmines that I experienced, and I hope that all of you, if you don't know, I would introduce you to landmines as well. And then these are some of the slides that I'm going to share with you. I've been to every single spot where landmines were used that I know of in the American Civil War, except Fort Fisher. It was closed the day I was there due to budget cuts, and Jackson, Mississippi. So landmines currently infest about 70, 80 countries around the world. There's the darker colors. There's the lighter colors in America, the United States. Not so much because of the American Civil War. I would argue that American Civil War mines no longer exist in the soil, but really due to Alaska, which is a project that I'm working on. I was in Alaska last year, but Japan invaded the United States in World War II, and they took over 2 islands, the Aleutian Islands, and they used landmines on both of them. A lot of Americans don't realize that, but one of the bloodiest engagements per capita, soldiers involved, took place in Alaska. There were a couple thousand casualties. So that's a project I'm working on. Probably going back next summer. But you can see the usual suspects in darker red are where landmines are used. Primarily, the countries are not very stable. In fact, I'm just going to throw away all my notes. This might hurt. So I was injured in Somalia, which I don't have a pen, but maybe I'll go. There it is. So this is Somalia right here. I was injured in this area. It was an area controlled by Al-Haddad. They're the precursors of today's Al-Shabaab. I spent my career in this part of the world. In fact, I was there about 6 weeks ago. I speak that language in the South. That's probably going to be my next book about Africa, West Africa. I wrote a book in Somali, but my next book is going to be about West Africa. But I just want to highlight in the slide that landmines are used around the world by a lot of people. What are they? They are victim-activated weapons. The National Rifle Association says guns kill people, guns don't kill people. Well, in this case, the weapon actually kills the person. This is a Type 72 Chinese mine in Cambodia. How it's detonated is when the victim steps on it or goes into contact with it. In the American Civil War, both contact and command detonated mines were used. Command detonated mines is we'll set a landmine up in the parking lot and we get to determine who the target's going to be by pressing a trigger or pulling a string. We don't want the mailman, we want the Domino's delivery driver, something like that. I don't know why I use that example. But this is a landmine on the left. They're about 50 cents to $1. These are, we call them toe poppers, because if you're an adult and you step on it, it'll probably take off your foot, your toe, pretty small. But on the right is the deteriorating effects of the mine in tropical soils, a study that we did at JMU, looking at the aging effects of the soil on different types of explosives. We did that for the Department of State. My discovery of this issue was in 2012. 2010, I moved to the Shenandoah Valley to take a position at James Madison University as director of the Center of International Stabilization and Recovery. What we did, the center was founded by a guy from Special Operations, Lieutenant Colonel Dennis Barlow, who retired to Newmarket. I met him in 1994 at the Pentagon after I was blown up in Somalia, and he was part of Operation Provide Comfort in northern Iraq. And he founded the center in 1996. I went there, I was a graduate student at Georgetown. We had dinner in Cartagena, Colombia, 2009. He said, I'm about to retire. Do you want to apply? I got 4 kids who all want to go to college. Being a teacher, it doesn't make this. But Virginia is very good public in-state universities. And so we made the move. And about a year and a half ago, I actually stepped down from my position as director to return my full-time job as teaching and writing, because this last book took me 8 years and I don't have it in me. My runway is getting a lot shorter and the projects still remain on the shelf. Anyway, in 2012, my second year in Virginia, there's my little minivan. We were a one-car family for a long time, had too many kids. But I was a chaperone for Harrisburg High School, the VCU, for a robotics competition. And the teacher needed a driver. And the teacher lived across the street from me and asked me. So I said, you bet. I drove my 2 sons and some other students to VCU. They're engineering guys. One's now a Marine weapons guy, ironically. And dropped them off at VCU, and I just cruised the Richmond battlefields. And I like to pull over and visit battlefields. Like this morning, I visited Morris Creek. Right? I left Harrisonburg at 5 a.m., got to Morris Creek at 11, 6-hour drive. And I pulled over, and there's this historical sign on the left, Fort Johnson. Landmines were used at Fort Johnson. Fort Johnson doesn't exist anymore. It's a housing division. But look at the sign. For me, landmines were used here in 1864. They're using these trenches. It was a little bit after the famous crater explosion in Petersburg, where the Union mined under Confederate positions and blew it up. So the Confederates here in late 1864, 1865, built their own crater and buried landmines, basically artillery shells with fuses on them to blow up. And this, I was like, oh my God. And this is the beginning. That's why the book was finished in 2020, because this is 2012. Yeah, that's right. My numbers are right. It took me 8 years. And this was the beginning of this discovery that I'm going to share with you on how and why landmines were used for the first time in the world's history on a widespread basis. I think this is probably the first comprehensive book on the subject, because when you Google landmines in the Civil War, it doesn't come up. It's either called land torpedoes, infernal devices, SUBTERRAs. There are different names for them. So that was my kind of like how I got started. My personal induction, I was operating in Somalia. I was a lone project officer. I was trying to economically stabilize a non-benign area. The US forces were in Mogadishu. That's when Black Hawk Down occurred, if you may know in the movie. But I had a radio to call for help. There's a radio right by my right hand, pre-cell phone. This is Kenya-Somali border. And I was going into Somalia to help economically stabilize this area through credit unions. I believe this is the last photograph of me with legs, with real legs. There's a Kenyan soldier who they just thought I was nuts going into this environment because there's like 16 different warlords. It's non-US controlled area. I totally enjoyed my job. I was in a Toyota Land Cruiser. December 16th, 1993 was a Friday. It was a Thursday. Muslims don't work on a Friday. The situation was going down in Somalia. Black Hawk Down happened 10 days before. If you don't know what that is, it was a major engagement of US forces in Mogadishu. I had a job offer with the US government to go to a new country called Uzbekistan. I just got engaged. I driven back. When you saw that photograph here, I went back to Kenya to use a landline to call my girlfriend, said, "You want to get married?" She said, "Yes." Drove back into Somalia. That was that. And then a couple of weeks later, this happened. And you see a donkey cart in the lower right-hand corner. I think that's helped save my life. Like, tell me there's not a God, because we slowed down. And I looked up because I had my papers in my lap because I was going to go to Kenya the next day, which was Friday, the day off, and talked to my fiance to see if I should move to Uzbekistan and she could move with me. And then the car went to the right and the right front tire hit the mine. And the reason I talk about the donkey, if we're going at a higher rate of speed, we probably would have all died in the car because the momentum of the vehicle would have carried over the explosion. But we went off at the angle and the whole right front got sheared. The car is perpendicular to the road here. I got a lot of photos. They did a sort of a CIS. Is it CIS? I don't know. Criminal investigation or investigation of the situation. These are the photographs from it. But unfortunately, that's where my legs were. Long story short, my girlfriend, my fiance, I asked her to leave me. She wouldn't leave me. She probably thinks about that now. But anyway, we have 4 kids. That's why I went to the battlefield today, because when she's not with me, I visit battlefields. To say she loves history would not be entirely accurate. But she stayed with me. And this is Reader's Digest. And she's been with me. She's been the wind beneath my wings like my whole life. So I just can't believe. I asked her to leave me and she wouldn't leave me. I don't get it. But anyway, she stayed with me. This is the event where I was talking to Bill about. Frederick Downs, that's the head right next to me. Somebody who worked with Bill in the VA. But this is the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee, 1994, CNN. First time I realized that my story wasn't unique. There are 26,000 people a year maimed or killed by these weapons. And I'm just one of them. The only unique part is that I'm American, protests at the White House. These are all going down the line, American foreign policy, Bosnia, Israel, Vietnam, Somalia, Vietnam, Korea, World War II, France. We wanted to bring artificial legs around the world. These are 2 World War II vets, the guy on my right, Jerry White, lost his leg in Israel. We started a fight for funds to bring prosthetics around the world, started an organization. The UN wouldn't give us a room. We hijacked a room. We looked at the calendar. It was empty. In the summertime, it's like JMU. Nobody's there except like band camp and soccer camp. We took over a room. We put up flyers around the UN pre 9/11 and said, what did we say? Oh, free food. Press conference. Nothing draws the media like free food because they're own. So we started getting coverage, got an Oprah to tell the story, and finally did a lot of work with the most famous person in the world at the time, Princess Diana. I can't tell, but the lower right is Elizabeth Dole, who later became senator from North Carolina. At the time, she was head of the American Red Cross, and Princess Diana was head of the British Red Cross. And this is Princess Diana's last visit to the United States. That night at the Women's Museum in DC, she wanted to work with us. And the photo on the right is from, I guess the right is from People magazine. That's in Bosnia. That's Princess Diana's last working week. She died a couple weeks after this photograph was taken. But that's a Muslim boy, Malic, and a Serbian Orthodox boy named Zarko, who each lost their legs on opposite sides of the war zone due to doing innocent acts, playing soccer and cutting wood. And then finally, that's Prince Harry a couple years ago. They did an HBO documentary about their mom. They wanted me in it. And then Sarajevo, Bosnia welcomed your mom. So the baton is passed. That's still my passion, still my work today. And then I wrote a book about landmines, but you don't even know that. So let's get to the Civil War. That's the introduction that I had. Sorry about the tapping. That's the introduction that I had. And it was a dream of mine to match these interests together, the love of the Civil War and my professional experience. So the Anaconda Plan, again, I don't know how much to say, but the point was of General Winfield Scott of the U.S. Army was to constrict the South, constrict their shipping down the Mississippi River, around the coast, to prevent the white gold or the cotton to leave. To counter that, the Confederates were outmanned and outgunned, but more importantly is they're unable to really protect their shorelines. There's a lot of natural harbors around the coast. The Mississippi River is really hard to control or defend. And so the Confederacy had to come up with several things to do. And it sounds like you're going to learn more about this next month. But they came up with inventions, and this is kind of getting into what I'm going to, the heart of my guts. But they invested in waterborne technologies to blow up Union ships. This is where I should probably, I don't know if you need my notes. The photo on the left is from the West Point Military Museum. I got into the basement down there. There's like 13 of them. There are these different types of water mines, and there's explosive agents are in the mine. The one on the right's from Mobile, Alabama, Mobile, in the museum, Fort Morgan State Historic Museum. And these are just floating explosive devices. And the idea was that you would have stationary water mines to help counter the Anaconda Plan. Another one that you all know about in North Carolina are the torpedo boats. You can see the spar right here. There's an explosive on the end of it. It's almost like a kamikaze type operation, but with the crew expecting to live. You ram them in, you raise the spar right when you're near the boat, and you try to ram the hull to sink the boat. These technologies were created, a lot of them were created by Maury, who wrote a best-selling book in 1853 about oceanography in the Atlantic Ocean. He was head of the Naval Observatory in DC for over 20 years. In fact, at the US State Department, right across the street to the left is the Naval Observatory. It's still there. And that street is called Maury Avenue. And so he was very involved in this, and his specialty was electric detonated mines, command detonated mines through electricity. That back then it was called galvanized current. And his plan was to have a lot of these explosives around the waters of Virginia, combined with small ships, small boats. He had some run-ins with the Confederate High Command. He ended up in England in 1862. But this is called a water keg mine, almost like a, dare I say, a beer keg that has explosive agents, couple pounds of gunpowder in it. It's chained to the bottom of the ocean floor and it floats. And so this would be a command detonated mine that Maury wanted to use. Some of them, I'm going to let Tim in. There you go. Or there, I think I just let somebody in. I hope you guys know him. So the first time that landmines were used, again, this is just my research. I could be completely wrong, and I'm probably going to be. I don't know. 1861 was the first time that landmines were used in the Western Hemisphere in the United States and by Americans. Columbus, Kentucky. You can see in the right that landmines were used right here on this road and right up here on this road. Across the river, Columbus, Kentucky, was Belmont, Missouri, that had a heavy chain with a lot of hundreds of explosives in the water. There are no casualties. These were command detonated mines. First of all, in the water, you had command detonated electric mines for attacking the Federal ships. And then you had land mines, kind of like clay pots. This is from Harper's Weekly. It's almost like a big tea kettle or a clay pot. And then the galvanized current, there are two holes under here that went underground or under dirt or brush to a box where Confederate soldiers would detonate the mines, command detonate. And here are Union forces clearing these mines. There are zero casualties because of these command detonated mines, because the Confederates withdrew after the fall of Fort Donelson. The Confederates were ordered to withdraw from their positions. They left the mines in place, and the Federals, through various means, discovered these mines. And when you contact these command detonated mines, they don't go off. Anyway, they had they had prisoners, and they could see the movable dirt where the mines are planted. So this is the first time that command detonator, any type of landmine, was used in North America, which is different than what was used in the Peninsula Campaign the following year. So that was 1861, 1862. These are all maps that Hal Jesperson, who's a cartographer, I hired him, and I just went to the official records of the War of the Rebellion to look at letters and cable traffic and everything else about where the landmines were. So in the Peninsula Campaign, the Union was going to march up for Fort Monroe, capture Richmond, the Confederate capital. The Magruder Line was across from the York to the James River, and General Rains, who's from New Bern, North Carolina, not under orders from his division commander Hill, he laid landmines around Yorktown and really on where the British fortifications were. And these were contact detonated mines. And when they withdrew in the morning of May 4th, as they withdrew towards Richmond, they laid landmines in Williamsburg. And I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about Yorktown and what type of mines they were first. The father of landmines for the Confederacy was General Gabriel Rains. His brother George Rains was 11 years younger. They both went to West Point. They're both really focused on chemistry and explosives. In fact, that's their state sign, the North Carolina State Historical Marker. There's my black truck that I'm driving now. That's outside the hotel down the street. And then this is the boyhood home they grew up. And General Rains, Gabriel Rains, in the 1854, he was posted to Florida during the Seminole Wars, and he practiced with booby traps and explosive devices on dead bodies, on dead animals as a way to fight the Seminoles. And so he brought this technology with him to the Peninsula Campaign in his first command post. So this is on the right is Harper's Weekly of Union soldiers getting blown up by landmines after the Confederates evacuated. On the evening of May 4th, the Confederates held. General McClellan thought that the Confederate forces there were larger than they really were, through a combination of trickery, such as Quaker guns, logs dressed up like cannons, making a lot of noise, marching back and forth. They got word that the Federals were going to attack soon, so the Confederates withdrew, and in their wake, they laid landmines. And as the next morning, the morning of May 5th, the Union saw that the Confederates withdrew. Jubilation, the bands roared, the bands played for the first time in a long time, and they went into Yorktown, and the first American that I could find killed by a landmine. Now there's, every year there are casualties, was a Union cavalry officer on the morning of May 5th. And many Union soldiers, I think like 26 in the first couple hours, were killed by these devices. There are a couple controversies about this. One, landmines were used in the city. You can see there's dots there in the city. That's only one of two cases where I could see that landmines were used in the Civil War for non-strategic or non-tactical purposes, almost like ISIS withdrawing from Syria and Iraq and laying landmines everywhere just to pollute the earth. The second time was 4 years later in 1865 in Spanish Fort in Alabama. Anyway, so a lot of and Gabriel Rains said, those weren't under my orders. I don't know what happened. I wasn't aware of these mines being placed around telegraph poles or inside people's houses, these type of things. So what was the mine? The mine in 1862 was a artillery shell, a 8-10 pounder with a probe. I'm losing my words, but there's a fuse inside that would ignite gunpowder inside the mine, and it'll be detonated by a brass cap at the top. Oh, plunger, that's what I was looking for. A plunger, which would ignite the gunpowder. And so you step on it and then it blows up. And so these were very artificial, but this is what's going on in different parts of the world, repurposing artillery. And this is Williamsburg. So, and this is different. One was a defensive purpose, setting aside the the mines that were planted in the town, but these mines were laid for delaying purposes. It was rainy on May 4th. Some of the wagons of the withdrawing Confederate forces were getting stuck. They didn't have backup. They didn't have protection on the withdrawal. And so some of them started using landmines or other artillery shells to help delay pursuit of the Federal forces. 1863, again, I could talk about each slide for like an hour, but I just want to give you, this is the sampler, the test case, and I pulled out 6 of 15 cases. Everyone is fascinating. Everyone could be a book. What's fascinating for me about Port Hudson, Louisiana, not only was it the longest siege in American military history, a true siege where the 7,000 Confederates were pinned in at Port Hudson. You see the defensive line on the map around Port Hudson. Estimates were to effectively defend this position, you need 15,000 soldiers and 3,000 in backup. And General Gardner, actually from Iowa, but he was with the Confederacy, married the daughter of the governor of Louisiana. Defend this position with 7,000 Confederate soldiers. Now, what's interesting about this for me is that the Union just poured in artillery. A lot of it were percussion shells, but they weren't going off. Percussion shells, you need a hard surface for it to go off. But it was hitting trees and sand. And there were some reports that I saw where over 90% of the Union artillery shells weren't exploding or unexploded. And meanwhile, the Confederates, they were forced to eat donkeys, they were forced to eat dogs. They were running out of ammunition. So they repurposed much of the unexploded Union ammunition that poured into their areas for other purposes. And in Port Hudson, the reason I really enjoy this study was it was the first time that I could find in the world's history, I've been doing this for like 25 years, where command detonated mines, like they were used at Columbus, and contact detonated mines, like they're using Yorktown and Williamsburg, were used at the same battle. In the north, at Fort Desperate, right up, if you can see Fort Desperate right here, there's Fort Desperate, Priest Cap, and the Citadel. The Citadel and Priest Cap both used victim-activated mines, or what I've been calling contact detonated mines. Fort Desperate, they're used as command detonated mines. Here's Fort Desperate. You can see why the defenders were so desperate. They're in an isolated position. It was hilly. They're being faced by thousands of Union soldiers coming through the woods. And this is the historical marker. Here they call them subterranean torpedoes. Every battle had a different name. And I think that's one reason why the research in this area has been lacking. But here's a trick. You lay the landmine outside your defensive position. You're looking through. They built some high ground observer positions. A string is going through, and then you yank it when the enemy is on top of it. These are subterranean torpedoes. These are examples of Federal 10 and 20 pounders that were used as landmines. This is in the Port Hudson Museum. And there's a cannonball over there. Just a quick story about this. I went there after I gave a speech in New Orleans on an entirely different subject. And I drove up to Port Hudson. I asked the ranger, it's a state park, great state park, just like Fort McAllister and Fort Blakeley. I'm interested in landmines. I've read some journals, and I know command detonated mines were used here. Victim activated mines were used here, and he just looked at me like I had 3 heads. And I started walking the battlefield, and about a half an hour later, a man came up. Usually nobody's, came up to me and said, hello, I'm the superintendent. We just Googled you. And we want to help. We want to help you all we can. And so I got some great information from the Port Hudson folks. Why is this important? Like, again, I'm just trying to share with you almost everything I know on the menu here. But these are just regular artillery shells that were repurposed as a different type of weapon. These are actual photos from Iraq that some of my former students brought back to me. These are US deployed cluster munitions, which have a high dud rate. The industry advertises that maybe like 3 to 5% duds out of like a couple, every 1,000. But in wartime conditions, every study shows that the dud rate is over 10%. The pilots don't sleep at the Holiday Inn. They're flying faster. They're flying higher. There's canopies. From Lao. Oh, we heard about that. Anyway, but the last study was in 2006 when the Israelis used these type of cluster munitions in southern Lebanon. So these are American cluster munitions here. Different types. Cluster munitions is a unitary or a shell or bomb. It releases a lot of baby bombs. There's a lot of duds, and these duds could be turned into landmines, otherwise known as IEDs. This is an actual scene of an attack on an American convoy. A lot of times they bury them under rocks, or they cut open the carcass of a dog or a goat laid by the side of the road. And when the American convoy comes by, you trigger it with a command. There's the observation post up here of the enemy, and there's an American convoy that got attacked with American ordnance. Almost the same idea that was occurring in Port Hudson. So I kind of want to make it real while studying history. This is, I can't see the top. Oh, Savannah, Georgia, I believe it says.
Sherman's March to Georgia.
What's that? Oh, Sherman's March to Georgia. Thank you. So this is a mine. This is from the West Point Military Museum. And this is the actual mine in the basement of the West Point Military Museum in New York. I got into the basement. Like I said, I do my email. I said, I've been doing this, and the guy got escorted down there. Great, just like it was an honor, just like it's an honor to go with Chris to Fort Fisher tomorrow. And these are all water mines from the beginning of my presentation. But as the Union started capturing ports and closing off rivers, the Confederacy did not want to waste their mines or their technology or these low-cost, highly effective weapons, and they started using sea mines on land. And this mine particularly was used outside Pooler, Georgia. Pooler, P-O-O-L-E-R. If you go to Pooler, Georgia now, right outside the courthouse is a historical marker that says landmines were used on that road when Sherman was coming through. Sherman wasn't very happy. I have story after story about General Sherman. One of his lieutenants, the Iowans, got pretty hit in Georgia by landmines, and he started marching Confederate POWs right in front of his men. And the landmines all of a sudden disappeared. Was leading up to Fort McAllister. This is super interesting for this group, I hope, when you compare Fort McAllister to Fort Fisher. Fort McAllister, the guns were mostly pointed towards the water, preparing for an ocean-based invasion, never expecting that Union would hit from the landward side. Of course, General Sherman's march ended in Savannah. Fort McAllister is south of Savannah. General Sherman wanted Fort McAllister. What the Confederate defenders did is they cut down a lot of trees and they planted a lot of landmines around Fort McAllister. I start open the book with the 57th and the 54th Ohio. And they're running across this minefield, getting blown up, boom, 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 boom. And I just, when I was reading those letters and the reports, it kind of brought me back to when I was trying to put my own foot on. That's how, there's one guy who was trying to find an arm, his arm. And I was trying to put my foot was off, but it was still attached by some skin, but I was trying to put that on. So I could almost just taste the blood in my mouth reading these letters. The fort fell very rapidly, but just so you know that the Fort McAllister, the guns were pointing in the right direction, this direction, almost like Aqaba with T.E. Lawrence capturing Aqaba, crossing a desert in the movie. So the Confederate defenders tried to use landmines as a force multiplier. It's cheap, it's effective, it increases military utility. There are a lot of Union casualties. Here's Fort McAllister today, awesome state park, but these trees is where the minefields were. These are the fortifications of Fort McAllister. And so landmines were used as a defensive mechanism. This is, again, Fort McAllister. They are called Confederate landmines there, and this is an actual landmine that was used outside Fort McAllister. After the battle, as in most battles, which I'm not really talking about here, clearance operations, but prisoners of war were ordered to clear their own landmines. Here's Fort Fisher. The Union shelling the day before, you all know the story, but I believe was the largest naval bombardment of World War II on land. Civil War. Civil War. Okay, sorry. I know I missed the largest Civil War bombardment of the American Civil War. What it did, it inadvertently blew up the command detonated mines wires going from outside the fort to inside the fort. Not expecting that. And so when the Union forces charged Fort McAllister from the landward side, Marines, Navy, unlike Fort McAllister, which was Army, and unlike Fort McAllister, which were contact detonated mines, i.e. Port Hudson or i.e. Columbus or Fort Desperate at Port Hudson, there are no casualties from these weapons, from the command detonating mines, because the wires were triggered. One of the, again, the water mines, the command detonated water mines, the operators, the Confederate operators triggering the water mines, a lot of them were captured or killed because the Union would land men on the shore, go up the James River on the landward side. So contact detonated mines, I would say victim activated mines, contacted mines are a coward's weapon. That we could lay them out there, run away, and we don't know who's going to step on it, but it could be a defensive purpose. Command detonating mines, you got to stay there. And then that defeats the military utility of these landmines because you don't know who's going to step on it. Bill and I were talking earlier, Bill, I hope you don't mind saying this, about Khe Sanh in Vietnam. And I was there after the war, Bill was there during the war. But I asked Bill, did he come across any landmines around Khe Sanh when the Marines were patrolling around Khe Sanh in Vietnam? And he said, not really. And I think we both agree it's because the VC, the enemy, was moving all over there at night, and the civilians, and you don't want to lay contact mines if you could be operating in that area because you don't know who's going to step on it. But here I diverge. I'm going off on a tangent. These are command detonated mines. And so the forces, the point here is if you could detonate the wires, the mines cease to become active. And that's why ISIS, the Taliban, and others really use as victim activated mines or command detonated mines. For one, they don't care if civilians are killed. They don't do that dichotomy. They don't care about indiscriminate killing, and they don't have to control it. The last battle is 1865 Spanish Fort. This Spanish Fort and Fort Blakeley. They're about 7-9 miles apart from each other. Here's a photograph of Spanish Fort. The Confederate defenders cut down the trees. There's Spanish Fort is this. At the end of it is a bastion called Fort McDermott. It's really not a separate fort. It's part of this chain. And landmines were used right out here, and I'm going to show you photos in a second, were used right out here. And they also placed them around watering holes far away from the battlefield, which is the only second time that nuisance mines were used besides 1861 Yorktown. So here's Fort McDermott now. I never knew about it. Like I stumbled, Spanish Fort is a housing subdivision now. I was walking around with a map, getting out of my pickup truck, walking through sidewalks, trying to avoid people's yards, and actually a cop car started following me around Spanish Fort. But Fort McDermott, I could park. I just parked right here, and I walked up through these trees and see a Confederate battle flag. Oh, there it is. I think that's, I'm not sure what the flag that is. But landmines were used between where I took the photo and these houses. According to my records, the landmines were used right outside Spanish Fort. In the middle of the night, the Confederate defenders retreated just as they did in Yorktown, and they moved in up towards Fort Blakeley. There were a couple casualties here. Again, the fort was evacuated, and there were a couple Union casualties here. This is the last land battle of the American Civil War. Fort Blakeley, I can't see what I wrote up there, but you see my truck. That's just to prove the sum, like my CPA and my wife, that I'm actually doing research. But I usually do it on the side trips. And I got here, it rained the night before. You can see the water. Nobody was there. It was during the week, during the school year. I was in I think Atlanta, doing a speech. I did this all like chunks out of my back of my hide type thing. And these were Union positions. Fort Blakeley's behind my pickup truck, and landmines were used in this whole area here leading to Fort Blakeley. These are contact detonated mines. And I realized as I was standing like probably right after I took this photograph, that this is the first time that I was on a former minefield since my accident. And even though I knew there weren't any mines there, I just like, oh my God, like one more step, like getting back to my car. It's just like subconscious, you could taste it in your mouth and it's still raw for me. But to think about the Union soldiers charging across the valley right here. My truck was down to the left, the Alliance and U.S. colored troops with red flags in their bayonets yelling, "Remember Fort Pillow," where a lot of USCT were killed after surrendering. They ran across this field and took Fort Blakeley, and the mines were planted in different ways. There were tripwires, tripping, which would set off mines, or tripwires for them to fall in stakes. I forgot they were called Vietnam punji sticks or something. Yeah, punji sticks. And then I also planted mines below boards. So if you stepped on one board, the 3 mines under the board would blow up. It didn't really defend. First of all, the Confederate defenders are vastly outnumbered. And they started running away from some of the U.S. colored troops because they thought they would be treated very badly somewhere. So here's a map of Fort Blakeley. This fight took place on April 9th on the afternoon of the morning of Appomattox. So they didn't get the email or the cell phone call. The war was over. But here's where the landmines were right here. And I couldn't find it here. I owe a lot to Mike Bunn, who's this historical director at Fort Blakeley, about this research and trying to find the mines. He said no one had ever come and done the research on the mines except for the metal detector guys. And I ended up going to a home of somebody in Atlanta who has landmines from Fort Blakeley. So this is kind of the end of the day. The academic part is, I think it's academic. These were command detonated. These are all the battles I looked at. I could not find any other battles. When I started this, I thought it was Fort Johnson, Yorktown, and started expanding my list. Command detonating mines were used in 3 battles or 3 forts in the American Civil War. Tripwires in 3, mostly were pressure. I mistitled that. I was probably very fatigued in the 8 years, but pressure would be command detonated or victim activated mines. Nuisance mines, as I mentioned, were Yorktown and Spanish Fort. I hope I got that right. And then there are delaying mines, where mines are used as a delaying action to delay or pursuing enemy forces. So these are photographs. It'll be hard pressed to tell where or when these were taken. The upper right photos from the Iraqi police of ISIS ordnance used as landmines and IEDs, and one manufactured landmine. The other 2 photos, you've seen the one in the upper left from the West Point Military Museum, and the bottom one's from the West Point Military Museum too. And these, again, were the investments that the Confederate High Command made into water mines to break the Anaconda Plan or help alleviate the pressure of the Anaconda Plan. But later, 2 or 3 of these mines were used on land, and the technology was applied to start manufacturing landmines. I left a lot out. I don't know what time it is, but let me just end on one thing, because this is so important, listening to my Audible book this morning on the drive down. I didn't even know I wrote this. Wow. Like the first official landmine center was in 1863, when the Confederate Congress appropriated $100,000 to create a landmine group at in Richmond. Why is that important? It's important because after landmines were used in 1862 in May, about 6 weeks later, General Longstreet found out that landmines were used. And he ordered Raines and Hill, the division commander, never to use them again. These were uncivilized weapons that were beyond the pale of humanity. Do not use them. And he was backed up by General Johnston. General Raines protested, and so did Hill, that we need landmines as a force multiplier, and that the Union are breaking international humanitarian law. They burnt down the city of New Bern, which is not entirely accurate, but that Federals were also doing their own mining underground of Confederate positions. It went up to Jefferson Davis, who ruled that landmines could be used if there was a military purpose. There's not a military purpose, he said, to shooting a sentinel or a sentinel or sniper, a picket. But a general would be a different story. There is that dispute within the Confederate High Command. By the November, December of 1862, everybody was in agreement that landmines were necessary. And by 1863, 1864, the Confederates were doing a full frontal assault, especially Jefferson Davis, to push out landmines out in the field. One of the big questions I had, one of the mysteries, I had a lot of mysteries. So it's like, why didn't the dogs bark? You know, Sherlock Holmes, the Hound of Baskervilles. Why didn't the dogs bark when there's a murder in the backyard? Well, the dog knew the owner who was the murderer. Anyway, but why didn't the dogs bark in Vicksburg, right up the river from Port Hudson, where both landmines were used? And Port Hudson fell on July 4th. Vicksburg fell on July 4th, 1863. Port Hudson surrendered the next day. Why weren't them? And my sort of theory on that is General Johnston at Yorktown, he and Longstreet opposed Raines's use of landmines. President Davis ordered Raines to Vicksburg to work under Johnston. To say that Raines was thrilled to be assigned to work under General Johnston would not be accurate. And he did the slow boat to China thing. He went down to Augusta, Georgia to meet his brother at the Augusta Powder Mill. He went to Jackson. So by the time Vicksburg fell, Johnson was already retreating with his forces from Vicksburg, and that's why landmines were used in Jackson, which is the only other place that I haven't visited besides Fort Fisher, which is going to happen tomorrow. There's a lot more there, but I think I'm just going to, what else is going on? Oh, I just want to thank you very much for listening. I really appreciate doing a story. It takes a part out of me. But I love, obviously, the subject in this field, regardless of the Civil War or Iraq or Libya or wherever. But I'm just very blessed to end up in Virginia and be introduced to this topic. So I want to thank, and just people who want to